Oh, there you go.
Seems like it takes a little bit.
Yeah, there's like a few second delay.
There's like a loading. Okay. Good morning, everybody. We will, I think, maybe wait for another minute here while people are getting themselves on and we're getting situated. But maybe while, for those of you that are here, if you could, as you join, add to the chat your name, affiliation. If you're here as a tribal citizen or representing a tribe, let us know, and maybe just some things for what brought you to the panel today. Morning, Nina. Good morning, everybody. As you join, just go ahead and put some info about yourself in the chat, and we'll get started here shortly. Welcome. All right. I think we'll get started. So welcome, everybody. We are very honored to participate today in the Tribal Conference, and we'll be talking about climate-driven coastal hazards for California. I am Maya Hayden. I am a guest on Hootchin territory on the eastern shore of San Francisco Bay. These are the tribal lands of the Lishan Ohlone, and they continue to protect and care for their ancestral homeland here. I am the Coastal Adaptation Program Leader at Point Blue Conservation Science, which is a conservation science nonprofit based up in Petaluma. And I have been overseeing the development of our Coastal Future web tool that we'll be demonstrating later today, and providing technical assistance and outreach as part of the partnership that we have with USGS. And so I'm also joined by Dr. Patrick Barnard. He's the research director for the Climate Impacts and Coastal Processes team at the USGS Pacific Coastal and Marine Science Center. And he has been overseeing the development and the application of the coastal storm modeling system that he'll be talking about today. All right. So my reminder is, so we were also just curious if any of you in the audience have any previous experience or have heard about the coastal storm modeling system or the Our Coastal Future web tool, if you've been involved in any sea level rise planning or communication or education. So let us know. And I launched a poll that I'm hoping everybody can see. Patrick, can you see that? Okay. So we'll give people a sec here. And hopefully, if you, let me know if people can see this in the chat, hopefully. Oh, there we go. Okay. And Patrick, are you seeing the poll results? I don't know if that shows up. Maybe if you hit the polls button.
If you click on the polls on the chat thing, it should be down there.
And I think everybody can see that. So, so far, it looks like most folks are unfamiliar, this is all new. So that's great. Welcome. And there are a few folks that have used it or have heard of it. So that's great. And Patrick, if you could mute yourself again. Sorry, I'm getting that feedback. Thanks. Great. Thank you, everybody. So the goal for today really is, I think, two-sided. So we're hoping you all leave with a better existing information and technical assistance is available to understand climate change hazards on the coast and how you can access that information. And then from our end, what we're hoping is to just gain a better understanding of how we can better support the tribes with tribal climate adaptation work or other work that you're doing. So that is what we're hoping to do. And we're going to do that first by just going through some presentations. So Patrick's going to review the latest sea level rise projections and potential impacts and give an overview of the USGS science and modeling that has been developed to support adaptation planning on the coast. And then I'm going to give a demonstration of the web tool, that our Coast Our Future tool, or we call it OCOF, where you can view and interact with all the modeling products. And then we're going to attempt a discussion, although I know we can't actually have you all heard, but through the chat and through some more polls, we'll take questions about anything that we presented, and then we'll talk about a little bit about how you could potentially use these resources and what additional resources might be helpful. So with that, I will pass it back over to Patrick.
Okay. If they'll let me. Let's try this. It's not seeing my PowerPoint now for some reason. Can you see it okay?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Sorry, thank you. So really excited for this opportunity. Thanks so much, Shasta, for the invite. We've been working across EPA Region 9 for quite some time, but we've had very little interaction with tribes and indigenous peoples in California. More of it's been focused out on the western fringes of Region 9 in Hawaii. We've done quite a bit of work to the north, but we've been working across California for some time now. And in particular, right now, we're focused on the north coast, where there's a much higher density of tribal lands and resources along the coast. And we really, and beyond that, with the work in Southern California, which is already out there, we just want to make sure that everyone is aware of this information. If there's any way we can feed into your planning process and support you, we'd love to do that. So kind of moving forward here, I wanted to ground this presentation in the really overwhelming observational evidence of climate change before we talk about future projections and those potential hazards. So I just grabbed some of the latest sort of talking points from some of the large international groups in terms of climate reports. So the World Meteorological Organization, for example, and IPCC. So first of all, key point, the past 6 years have been the warmest years on record. It doesn't matter which meteorological organization you look to, whether it's in Asia, North America, Europe, the signal is the same. It's increasing in temperature, and it's increasing very, very rapidly. It's a statistical improbability that we would randomly have the 6 warmest years in the 250 year or so temperature record be consecutive. And in fact, based on the very conservative IPCC body, global surface temperatures have increased faster since 1970 than in any other 50-year period over at least the last 2,000 years. And in fact, over the last 20,000 years, the temperature is currently increasing at a rate of about 70 times faster than the most rapid pre-industrial rate. Now this relates to sea level rise. Global temperatures directly influence the rate of sea level rise, although there's a bit of a lag. But now we've got water level sensors across the globe, and we know that the rate of sea level rise has roughly tripled since 1971, currently close to about 4 millimeters per year. And it's also risen faster since 1900 than any other preceding century in at least the last 3,000 years. So things are changing, they're changing more rapidly. There's almost really no historical anecdote for the rate of change, which is most alarming to climate scientists. And things are going to continue to change. Sea level is going to rise for hundreds of thousands of years due to continued deep ocean warming, ice sheet melt, and it's going to stay up there for quite some time. So whether we're planning for 2050 or 2100, it's not a brick wall where things are going to all of a sudden cease. It's going to go on. So any decision making that we make in the short term will have long-term benefits. So as of right now, again, this very sort of conservative body is looking at about 0.5 meter to 1 meter of sea level rise over the next century. These are the latest AR6 projections from IPCC. But there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of ice sheet behavior in Antarctica in particular. And so there's a number of sort of the higher end, low probability, but high risk projections put sea level out to 1.5, 2 meters and even above by 2100, depending on how the ice sheet behaves. And our understanding of that behavior is increasing day by day. So how this relates to our society, what's the relevance of sea level rise? Well, there's almost 1 billion people living in the coastal zone. And so as sea level rises, our once in a lifetime coastal flooding event is going to occur about every year by 2050 and about every single day by 2100. So this risk is going to increase in a nonlinear fashion. But it's not just a bathtub. We have to consider storms and the dynamic response of our beaches and cliffs. And when we do that, based on the research that we performed across California and beyond, about 3 times more people would be at risk of sea level rise. And if we just look at it as a static bathtub. Now, across California, what this means based on research we've been doing the last decade or so is we could lose about 2/3 of our beaches due to the rising seas. And this is not to mention extensive ecological and cultural resources along the coast will be threatened as well. End of century, this equates to about 500,000 people and $200 billion in property at risk over the next century. And to try to put in perspective over most recent natural disasters, these impacts are about 10 times greater than the worst wildfires and earthquakes that we've ever experienced. So it's something that we really need to think about strategically how we're going to plan moving forward so we don't realize these potential impacts. This is just if we do nothing. And so this is the time to act. And so there's lots of modern analogs for what we're going to expect more of in the future. This is not just some futuristic problem. It's really happening now. We see sunny day flooding in many urban areas, especially during king tides, such as in San Francisco. We see them in rural areas, like in Humboldt Bay. We see this sunny day flooding, which can also affect tribal resources like the Wiyot Village site on Tuluwat Island in Humboldt Bay as well. So it's really across the board. No one is immune to these potential impacts, which are happening now, and it's just going to get worse in the future if we don't act. And the storms also that we've experienced in the recent past can tell us something about more of what's to come in the future. Going back to the 82, 83 El Nino is one really large event that sticks in people's minds, like myself growing up in Southern California, and kind of what that did to coastal resources and our beaches and piers. But then are also seeing more sort of run-of-the-mill storms affecting our infrastructure and our ecological and cultural resources along the coast, such as here in Santa Cruz just a couple years ago, a road that maybe just flooded once every several decades back in the middle part of the 20th century. Now we're seeing this kind of flooding just about every single year. And again, it's an open question about whether our infrastructure can contain these rising seas. Some of it is crumbling. Some of this, for example, these levees in Humboldt Bay were built in the 1800s. And so we really have to think about how we're going to adapt to further rising sea levels. So USGS, we sought out to develop a tool to look at the vulnerability of our communities across California and beyond to sea level rise, in addition to storm hazards and the evolution of the coast itself. And at the time, what was available were just these very simple static models that treated the sea like a bathtub, and you would raise the water levels based on the high tide and sea level rise, and then you'd have flooding. But there's all these other dynamic processes at work that can increase the vulnerability, and is really what needs to be planned for. So just an example here from Foster City, which shows an area protected by levees. It's very much like a mini New Orleans. So the areas in green are not actually flooded with about 25 centimeters of sea level rise without a storm. But when you consider a large storm event, the vast majority of Foster City is vulnerable to flooding. And these are the sorts of events that we're trying to model and predict so we can robustly plan for the impacts of sea level rise and storms. So we built the coastal storm modeling system to address all these different physics that are involved in water levels along the coast and flooding. Use the latest global climate models to understand the future path of the climate and how it'll affect wave conditions and surge conditions along the coast. Include all the relevant physics. So we wanted to include the seasonal effects like El Nino, storm surge, river discharge, wave-driven water levels along the coast, set up and run up, and then also the relative motion of the land, which is really important in a lot of parts of our coastline. And then include a very large range of sea level rise and storm scenarios to match any planning horizon, whether it's emergency planners trying to strategically prepare for the next big winter storm, or large scale infrastructure investments, for example, cultural resources that we're really looking to maintain and protect over the next century due to the most extreme events. So develop this across California initially. Now it's much bigger than that, but we can talk about that toward the end here. We have full coverage now south of Point Arena, including San Francisco Bay, for this full suite of sea level rise and storm scenarios. And then we began building out work in the North Coast a couple of years ago, and we're sort of in the home stretch for that work in the North Coast. So we'll have all of California done next year. And in doing this work over the last decade, we've been working with federal, state, city governments extensively to develop products that can directly feed into their planning process. And we're available and excited to customize these tools to meet any individual planning needs. So despite what you might see today may not be the perfect fit, and if it's not, please reach out. We'd love to work with your group, your tribe, whatever it may be, to support, provide science support so you can make some decisions based on future conditions. So this is just an overview of the coastal storm modeling framework. What we do is we look at the latest global climate models. We take the wind fields, typically from an ensemble of climate models looking out to 2100. And then we develop global wave models, which are then downscaled to the shelf scale, and continue to increase the resolution to the regional and local scale, all the while bringing in locally generated waves, storm surge, tides, and ultimately translating water levels and waves across the surf zone and predicting flooding. In parallel, we have several different models which are predicting the long-term response of the beaches and cliffs through time. Then all this information gets translated and transferred over to Maya's group at Point Blue for the Our Coast, Our Future tool. So all this many hundreds of gigabytes of data can be served up on the fly in this interactive Google interface. And there's also another tool I'll mention briefly, where all this information on flooding and erosion hazards gets translated into socioeconomic impacts. And so this is that HERA tool, where we take these hazard zones and then look at what's within those zones across California. So now, instead of just being able to look at flood maps, now we can say something about what's within that flood zone. And this was driven and fed into California's fourth climate assessment. And so now for California, by end of century, we've projected that there's several 100,000 acres of ecologically rich coastal land that could be flooded. So talking about grasslands, forests, wetlands, et cetera. Thousands of kilometers of roads, hundreds of critical facilities like schools and police stations. There's all kinds of demographic information in here and different ways you can parse out the data. So lots of opportunities there to build and also customize for your particular needs. But as we were doing this work, we got lots of feedback of another looming hazard that people were interested in having assessed, and that's the groundwater hazard along the coast. And the general concept here is that along the coast, the water table is quite shallow because it's essentially set by sea level. And so as sea level rises, that water table will rise as well, potentially emerging in communities along the coast and potentially drowning cultural resources and ecosystems in the process. Saltwater intrusion is also a major potential issue for agriculture as that saltwater wedge pushes further inland and gets more shallow. And so we've done this now across the state where we've assessed the response of the water table to sea level rise and looking at hazards. And what we found in some instances, like in Pacifica, shown to the left here, there may not be flooding this community until the end of the century with an extreme storm from overland flooding. However, using the water table modeling projections, we find that the water table is already quite shallow on a daily basis. And so at that same level of sea level rise, where it may only be affected via overland flooding from an extreme event, the water table may in fact be already daylighting at the surface and causing issues for that community. And it'll just get worse as we go to the higher sea level rise scenarios. So just looking at this and with another graphic that Point Blue developed, this is the basic concept, is that we have this water table, which is set by sea level at the coast and also by recharge and the hydraulic conductivity of the sediment the water flows through, and you have this saltwater wedge here. And so then when you raise sea level, the shoreline moves landward effectively, the water table rises, and the saltwater wedge shoals and moves further inland. And in some cases, where the water table intercepts the land, you may end up with swampy conditions, standing water, and that's really what we're concerned about moving forward, is even though there may be some kind of natural barrier like a dune or infrastructure in place, seawalls, what have you, this is not going to stop this daylighting of the water table and causing issues in some communities and resources and back at the beach. So that's what we're trying to model with that. And so in addition to just the simple emergence and flooding of the water table at the surface, there's other issues that need to be considered. For example, just with shallower subsurface water, that is, you can undermine building structures and roads, you can flood basements, it can cause issues for utilities like fiber optic cables, it can cause lots of issues for sewage pipelines, septic systems, etc. This research on impacts on groundwater, though, is rather immature. But we do know just from an exposure perspective, when we look at high sea level, a higher projection of 2 meters, which is the same numbers I showed you for the overland flooding, and shallow groundwater within 2 meters of the surface, when we look across the state of California, no matter what metric you look at, this potential exposure is on the order of about 6 to 9 times greater than the overland flooding. So it's something we really have to think about moving forward and consider it along with the overland flooding hazard that we talked about just before. So, this equates to, about $1 trillion of property potentially exposed to these hazards and over 1 million acres of coastal land. So something we have to put on the map also and consider as we move forward. And this also kind of sheds light on the different end member adaptation options to sea level rise that we typically consider, from retreat to elevating or blocking or or restoring with some like green levees or some green infrastructure. The big question moving forward is, well, what about groundwater? And certainly the latter two are unaffected. Groundwater flooding and shoaling will be unaffected by these two adaptation options. And so we have to think about how can we accommodate and evolve our adaptation strategies based on this idea that groundwater is going to be a significant hazard in some places as well. So the work I've described has been used quite extensively across California, in particular through the LCP process, where we've supported dozens of cities and counties across the state and beyond. Caltrans has been using it to assess the vulnerability of transportation infrastructure across the state. We work with the Coastal Commission extensively to support their evaluation of coastal construction permits. It's been integrated into climate change guidance, and it's been used as leverage in the most recent spending package of about $4 billion by the state done to support the climate resilience initiative that just went through. And as I mentioned, it has been used quite a bit to support tribes and indigenous peoples outside of Region 9, a little bit in the western fringes of Region 9, the Pacific Islands, but even more extensively up in Region 10, actually Puget Sound, including quite a bit of work with the Tulalip, Nooksack, Nisqually, and Swinomish tribes up there. But we're really excited. Hopefully this can open up some opportunities to better support tribal interests in California, particularly the North Coast, where the work is soon to come out. And we'd like to get ahead of that as much as we can and be able to customize products that can feed into planning processes as soon as possible. So this work is, as I noted, moving beyond California. Quite a bit of work going on out in the Pacific Islands, which has about the same amount of coastline as the entire west coast of the United States. And we do a lot of work with BIA and the Office of Insular Affairs within Interior, Park Service, et cetera, to support different initiatives and needs across the region. But beyond the Pacific, there's also versions of Cosmos that are being developed currently in Alaska, mentioned Puget Sound, all across the Pac Islands. That work will be completed the next year or two for the most part, and also is being built out in the Southeast United States currently. So within about 2 years or so, we'll have all these areas covered, with the exception of the Gulf Coast in the Northeast, which is areas under development. So it's part of a larger national approach to develop consistent hazard products that can feed in to planning in a consistent way across the country. So with that, now the really exciting part is how you can actually access the information. And Maya will discuss the Our Coast, Our Future viewer and how this information is served up. Here are some other websites you can turn to for more information. And please reach out anytime. We'll really be excited to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. We did get 2 questions that I'm hoping you can address. And yeah, if you don't mind, thanks. Around Humboldt Bay, these are this is from Nina Hapner. There was a lot of work done to restore some of the lost wetlands on the south side of Arcata. Has that had some positive impacts on the flooding? I don't know if you know. Yeah,
Aldron Laird is their sort of man on the ground there, has got a lot of information about all the adaptation process. We're currently developing the model for Humboldt Bay right now. So I imagine it has had a positive effect. I think the open question is probably the long-term sustainability of that work and how it will really mitigate future coastal hazards. But that's a topic we could certainly help to address as this work comes out next year.
Thanks. And then the second question was, with king tides, I think we're seeing higher high tides, but are we also seeing lower low tides? And I'm assuming this is with sea level rise.
Right. No, the baseline is shifted upwards. So, for California, that's about 8 to 10 inches over the last century. So those low tides have also moved up a little bit. So just it's a simple, basically shifting of the baseline. In some cases, you may have amplification. The tidal pattern has changed a little bit, where you may have some slightly lower tides, but by and large, the whole baseline has shifted up on the order of about a foot over the last century, and will continue to do so.
Thank you. Great. All right. So I am going to talk about the web tool that takes all of this amazing modeling products and basically gives you a platform to understand, visualize, and adapt to these coastal climate hazards. And so we have been in a partnership with USGS to develop this product over the last decade. And the goal was really to provide, kind of easy, user-friendly resources to understand, visualize, and adapt to sea level rise and coastal storms. And now there's also erosion and groundwater rise incorporated. And it was collaboratively developed with many, many stakeholders, sort of end users on the ground, and is the platform for basically showcasing the USGS Cosmos data. And so while I go through this, you guys are welcome, since everyone is probably in front of a computer, to go to ourcoastourfuture.org and kind of check it out. So I'll be giving a little live demo, but it is also useful to just play around with it. So what's new, we just recently, a couple months ago, did a relaunch of the site. And so we've added in some new data and some new functions and features that I'll go through. Okay, so again, if you go to ourcoastourfuture.org, you'll hit our landing page, and I'll go through some of the other materials, but I want to just make sure we have time. So I'm going to get to the meat of it, which is the hazard map. So if you click on the hazard map, there's the disclaimer. And it's essentially just a kind of interactive map viewer. So it works, similarly to Google Maps or any of the other kind of online mapping. So on the left-hand side are the main controls. So you can choose the region. It defaults to the full California coast, which are the default output products from Cosmos. And then we've also run a few specific scenarios for some of these other areas, and we have a few more to add. Then you can choose which topic you're interested in. So most people look at flooding initially, but we have all kinds of other output products, including cliff retreat, shoreline position, and groundwater that you can take a look at. And then the main controls are increments of sea level rise, and then the storm frequency. And you can also change this into feet if that is easier for you to think about. All right, so on the right-hand side is the legend that basically will show you whatever is being displayed. And there are additional layers here that you can layer on top just for, helping you navigate. So I am going to just give an example of Wilder Ranch State Park. So there is this kind of location box, and there's also these zoom controls down at the bottom. But there is a beach here. This is just north of the Santa Cruz region on the Central Coast. And as I understand, somewhere within the vicinity of the coast here, there's a large shell mound site that has been restored and with some recent efforts by the Amamutsan tribe and state parks. And so one of the things that most people do will, come to a location of interest and then just start to kind of look around and see. You can start to see, as I increase the sea level, how that beach starts to become flooded through time. And so you may be interested to see, okay, what are the potential thresholds that might, affect the beach or some of the surrounding kind of wetland areas where Wilder Creek comes in. You can also look at how storm events, then, with a larger storm event, you're going to see this whole area sort of intermittently flooded. And again, that's just during the storm event. But that also has implications for, potential vulnerabilities to resources. So the other thing to point out is that you can generate a report that will give you just basically like a quick summary of everything that's in here. so you click on this little icon that looks like a little graph, and you can draw a freehand area, or you can actually upload a GIS, like a polygon. I'm going to just draw a little freehand, and we'll see. Let's say I'm particularly interested in this beach, and so I draw that, and I will get this report that's generated. And what's nice about this is down at the bottom, there's a reminder of what polygon I drew. And then this summary basically gives you the percent area that's flooded under all the different combinations of sea level rise and storm events. And so for this particular site, we can see that even with no sea level rise, so present day conditions, when there's a large storm event, a significant fraction of that beach is already flooding. Now, you can see if we don't look at storms, we're just looking at sea level rise, I'm not going to start to get significant flooding like greater than 50% of that beach area until pretty high amount of sea level rise. But I will note that, with any kind of large storm events, I am seeing those impacts kind of early on. So it's just a way of getting a sense of the thresholds for flooding and for different vulnerabilities that you might want to consider. It's a nice quick snapshot. Okay, the other thing that you might be interested is in not just flooding, but potentially, let's say, that there are resources or assets on the bluff tops that you're interested in. And so there's information about cliff retreat that you can then look at with increases in sea level rise. And so what you end up with here is sort of a zone, a hazard zone within which the top of the cliff is projected to erode back to. So you can start to look at that. And again, with any of these, you can hit this question mark, and it will get you to an infographic that explains what you're looking at with this kind of oblique view of the cliff, and then what that pink zone is actually showing you. So these are very handy, and we have those for all the different topics. Okay. There's also shoreline position information that gives you that same thing. In this case, it's the location of the mean high water line. And so you can see that, not only are you going to get inundation at the beach, but also the beach itself is going to erode. And one of the things to just point out is that, the coast in its natural form is always evolving. And so in places like this, where there's more natural sort of back beach area behind the beach, it's very possible that this beach can then, move inland, right, with sea level rise, that it will erode, and the beach can kind of move backward into some of the wetland areas. And so everything kind of can transgress inland. But in other areas, that's not the case. So we'll go to Malibu, down to Southern California, and I think there's also an ancestral Chumash village down here at Malibu Lagoon that might be of interest. And here, there's a lot more just existing infrastructure constraints. The beach is very narrow and is backed by houses or the highway. And the lagoon as well has those kind of pinch points. And so you can start to look at how the projections for erosion or for flooding might make these areas vulnerable, and then start to think about adaptation strategies that you could use. The other piece I wanted to just point out is that we do have that groundwater information that Patrick mentioned that's in here, and hopefully it will load. So when you're looking at the groundwater data set, you're looking at the blue zone, which is that flooded, ocean water flooding from the surface. But in addition, you're sort of looking below the ground surface with all these other colors to think about how deep is that shallow groundwater table, and where might you start to see, as sea level rise increases, that you get these emergent areas where the groundwater table is actually coming up out of the ground surface. And so in those cases, as Patrick mentioned, you're thinking about how adaptation strategies that might protect you from surface flooding, from that direct overland flooding, may not actually provide the same kind of protections from the groundwater. The other components are that you can compare. So I'll go here. You can compare scenarios side by side. And so there's two controls that you can look at. So you can choose, the baseline, and then you can look at maybe like a really high sea level, and you just drag the screen back and forth to look at the difference. So that's available. And then I just quickly wanted to run through the other features. All of the data that you are seeing here in the viewer, you can actually get access to download, either through the viewer here with the download data, or through the USGS Science Base. And so I just want to point out some of the other features. So there's an about page that talks about the history and the partnerships, how to get started, how to cite the information, and how to get help. The science and modeling page gives you just a brief update about how, the latest projections for the state of California, the details about the Cosmos modeling and what information is available. And that's where you can get more information about each of the topics that you can view in the viewer, as well as how to download the GIS data. So this is just the step-by-step instructions. Again, we don't have all of the data up on the Our Coast, Our Future site, but we have links here to access it. So I'm going to stop there, and I am hoping then that we can start to get some questions through here. I don't know, Patrick, if you've seen anything's coming up.
Yeah, there aren't any questions in the chat. Just Lori noted that provided a link to some of the archaeological work that's going on the Santa Cruz coast, I think that you alluded to.
Thanks. Great. Let's see. How do I stop sharing? There we go. Okay. So I think we had a couple questions as we shift into the discussion piece here. Okay, give me a sec.
And as you do that, we're really welcome folks to reach out in any capacity. We, on a weekly basis, we're supporting different agencies and organizations with this information. And so we're accustomed to using a significant amount of our bandwidth for local and regional support. So please feel free to reach out at any time.
Definitely. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information, and probably the most useful thing is going to be to, kind of digest and play around with the tool, and then you'll have a lot of questions. So I understand if you're one of those people that needs some time. I think I'm going to launch a couple polls. So again, it seems like these come up when you go, where there's the chat and the Q&A. There's a polls section. I think most of you figured out how to find that or have used it before. So the next question we have is how many of you basically have been planning for coastal climate hazards to date? And so just kind of curious in what capacity or how you've engaged with some of the planning, because there has been quite a lot in California, mostly led by local governments. And so, yeah, just kind of curious about that. We'll give a few. And if you have, some other engagement, please just type that in the chat and we'll keep track. Great. Yes. So it looks like most people are kind of landing where they have not, but they have more pressing issues, other climate impacts are more pressing, which we totally understand. And then it looks like several of you have participated or led tribal-led climate vulnerability assessments to look at sea level rise impacts. So that's great. And then hopefully we've got some additions. All right, I'm gonna end that one.
And Nina had a question while we were doing that. Just she asked, where do you go to look at seawater intrusion on Okaw?
Right. So we don't have that in a sort of I do think that Kevin Beefus, who's the researcher that developed the groundwater modeling, I think he has a component that is available that looks at salinity, that wedge and how it moves inland, but it's only available as a like GIS data, right? And I think that's right, Patrick. You probably know
Yes,
more about
Kevin
it.
has a direct link to that information. So Nina, if you just want to reach out, I can make sure to point you to that link directly.
Great. Anything else coming
in? And then, yeah, Adam Cantor just asks if the modeling of the inner bay will be modeling inner bay and bluff retreat. It will only be looking at coastal flooding within Humboldt Bay. It's not looking at shoreline or bluff retreat. But I know that's something that I believe we talked about some time ago as an area of further research, which is really important, especially for that southern area. And I know you've noted some significant retreat of Table Bluff in southern Humboldt. And then Anna Wines is asking, can a similar but opposite model be made in regards to drought impacts in drying waterways more inland? That's definitely beyond our wheelhouse. But there definitely are a number of efforts looking at the interior and climate impacts. And I think that's going to be, it was a focus of California's 4th assessment. And I believe the drought aspect is going to be even more of a focus in California's 5th climate assessment, which is just ramping up right now.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, so I just launched another poll. It's just kind of curious, based on what you've heard, if these existing resources that we presented, if you could see a use for them already. So yeah, just let us know about that. And then I'm going to launch one last poll, which is more just around ideas of additional resources, activities, support that would help, potentially help you. And this is definitely one where if you have other ideas, please put them in the chat. Great. So it looks like we've got some interest. It seems like the existing resources, have some potential to provide value, and then getting a whole mix of things, additional resources or capacity building that might be helpful. So thank you. That's really helpful. And again, I think maybe we'll put our contact info and the links in the chat. Patrick, what's the USGS end thing? USGS.gov? Or you can put your own. Oh, I can't hear you anymore.
I'm in the process of doing this. You don't have to worry.
Thanks. All right. And yeah, maybe I'll go to the last one here. This has all the goodies. So I'll type in the different oops, I did that one wrong. USGS.gov. HERA is the socioeconomic tool that Patrick mentioned that we didn't demo, but please take a look at that. That has that digests the socioeconomic information, both for the surface water flooding and the groundwater piece. And then here's the link.
And I don't know if the conference is sharing all the presentations, but certainly that's fine with me. And if you guys would like a copy, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to share the PowerPoint that I presented.
Great. Thank you so much for participating. We really appreciate it. And hopefully, you know, we'll hear from you as your bell. And I think I had one other last thing here to close out. As Patrick mentioned, so the North Coast data will be coming next year. And you know, I think one of the things I just wanted to leave on a more positive note, that we know that climate is changing at an unprecedented rate, and that science, including traditional knowledge, is critical to inform decision making. But it's really our social values, our societal values, that will ultimately drive decisions. So I think two of the foundational values that anchor Indigenous cultures are shared responsibility for the land and the community, and also the knowledge that all actions affect future generations. And these values, I think, are really critical to shaping the choices we make today to ensure a resilient future for all. So thank you, and please get in touch with us and let us know how we can help.
Yeah, thank you for joining.